Do you think this is the plugin or the hardware synthesizer? And this is the other one. All right, do you think you know which one it is? We'll do it one more time, okay? So is this Behringer Vintage or the Prophet 600? And now this is the second one. Do you guys think this is Behringer Vintage or the Prophet 600? So if you guessed that the first one was the hardware, you are correct. Welcome to the stream, guys. I'm Vulture Culture. In tonight's stream, we're going to be comparing Behringer Vintage, the brand new free plugin from Behringer that is designed or modeled off of vintage synthesizers. And we're going to be comparing that to an actual vintage synthesizer, the Sequential Prophet 600 from 1982. And the goal of this stream is going to be to decide, does Behringer Vintage hold up to the name? Is it really as good as a vintage synthesizer, or is there still some reason to buy these ancient machines? And you guys will be the judge of that. So at the end of the stream, we're going to do a poll asking the question, does Behringer Vintage come close enough to be, sort of a replacement for vintage synthesizers? And if you want to just see that, I'm going to put a timestamp in the description below, so you could just go to the bar and move to the poll results. But I hope you'll come with us on this journey tonight to check out the comparison and differences between a software plugin, a brand new one, a free one from Behringer, and the Prophet 600, an incredible vintage synth, again, from 1982. So the roadmap for tonight's stream is we're going to start by checking out some of the presets for Behringer Vintage, just so you can get an idea of what the software sounds like. Then we'll do a direct comparison between the oscillators of the Prophet 600 and the oscillators of Behringer Vintage, as well as the filter versus the filter of Behringer Vintage. We'll also try some things that are cool that you can do on the Prophet 600 that you may or may not be able to do on the Behringer Vintage, and I'm sure there's a couple of things in Behringer Vintage that we won't be able to do on the Prophet 600. So we'll sort of do a comparison and contrasting as far as some of the features that both of these have built in. And then I do want to address some of the controversies around Behringer. So we'll kind of get to that towards the end of the stream. And then, like I said, I'm going to have you guys vote on if you think, as far as sound goes, if Behringer Vintage sounds as good as a real vintage synthesizer. So real quick here, let's just pull up some presets here. I'm going to just go through a few of these kind of fast so that you can get an idea of what the plugin sounds like. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't know why, but a lot of these presets really suck. Like, even compared to how the software... I don't really... Some really weird ones. Let's see if there's anything else interesting. Let's go check out the Fifth Element pad. that one's not terrible, but yes, DJ, I agree. These presets are shockingly poor. Yeah, just really, really not great presets, and there's not that many of them, right? This is it right here. And that's it. One thing that was kind of frustrating is there was no init patch, so I actually created one just for the sake of this stream. Sari, they said that they modeled it meticulously on vintage synthesizers, but they didn't say which one. I am pretty sure the idea for this plugin is the Prophet 5, right? It kind of feels like a Prophet 5 plugin, and that's why I picked the Prophet 600, because Prophet 600 is really the only affordable way to get that Prophet 5 sound if you want a vintage synthesizer. Looking on Reverb today, you can get one of these for like $13.50 with shipping, which is pretty awesome, considering that's like what, 3 times Behringer's Pro 800 with a keyboard and everything, and it's, you know, real vintage circuitry. That's with a Glee mod and all of that. And so it's pretty cool that you can get a synthesizer basically like a Prophet 5 for this price point. The oscillators are Curtis Electro Music chips, 3340s, which are the same ones in the Prophet 5 Rev 3 and the Oberheim OBX-A. The filter is a CEM 3372, which is the same that's, you know, cloned in Behringer Pro 800, but different than the 3320s or whatever they were in the Prophet 5. So it's a little bit different, but it's interesting. Vincent, welcome to the stream. Yeah, so we'll get into all of that, but right now we're listening to Behringer Vintage. Let's jump in and compare the oscillators, because the synth sounds a lot better when you make your own presets. So starting with the sawtooth wave, let's just do the typical thing where we check out the octaves and how it compares to the hardware synth. So this is Behringer Vintage. And now comparing that to the Prophet 600. Oh, let me go ahead and turn the preset off here. And did my synth die? What happened to my synth here? Here we go. I don't know what happened there. Loading. All right, let's see. There we go. That was the problem. Okay, so let's compare the oscillators. I'll just jump in here. And comparing that with Vintage. Really, you know, pretty damn close, right? Back to Vintage. You know, to my ears, I'm not really hearing anything that's like that too much. No, I did not succumb to trying their hardware, Parbs. Welcome, welcome. What PC hardware we're using, sound card, could make a difference. I don't really think so, but I have a custom-built computer. I'm using an RME Digiface, which is, you know, probably the highest end sound card you could possibly have, but yes, and the 3372s and the Matrix 12 and the Simmons SDS 8 and the Chroma Polaris, if I believe. So it's a really cool synth. Anyways, comparing just the sawtooth wave, I don't really think there's a huge difference here. Let's jump over to the square wave, and we can do that just by moving this over. We're listening to Vintage, by the way, sorry. I think I have the pulse width is being modified, so let me just put that to 0 real quick. Now comparing that with the Prophet 600. You can hear a pretty big difference. Versus get much more of a sort of less of a beefy sort of tone. You'll also notice it says plus width here. Nice little typo. So yes. So I mean, really, you could hear it more like if I'm playing a chord. That's Behringer Vintage versus playing that same chord. aside from the volume differences, right? That's a very nice sound versus this. To me, a little bit, maybe a little bit. It's just not the prettiest thing. Real quick, let's compare the triangle waves. So here we are, we're listening to Vintage. Wait a second. Oh, sine wave. So we got the sine wave here. We don't have a triangle wave that I see. It looks like we just have a sine. One thing I do like is you can hear a little bit of a sound in there. Not a perfect sine wave, which is kind of nice. Comparing that to the Prophet 600's triangle wave. It's really good, right? It just has that beautiful, again, comparing chords here. Got a nice little fizzy top end going on. Jumping back to Vintage, comparing the chord. You know, it's not terrible. It's cool, but it doesn't have the sort of drive or the character to it. What do you guys think so far? I think the Sawtooth wave sounds pretty damn good. It is a Sawtooth wave. It's not the hardest thing in the world to capture, but, you know. If anything, it seems like the Prophet just is thicker. Yeah, to me, you know, the hardware sounds back to Vintage. Yeah, it's not terrible though, just at this stage, right? Now, something we can do on a Prophet 600 that you can't do on every synth, but is cool, and I'll just mention it real quick. We can actually turn on multiple waves. Playing the wrong synth. So we're listening to the Sawtooth and the Square at the same time. We can even put the triangle wave in, which is very thick and beautiful. Almost too thick, maybe? Right, so that's something we don't have any control over, but I don't fault that to Behringer because not a lot of synthesizers could do that type of thing. It was really kind of like the Prophets, and I think the Junos were the only ones. Yeah, so that's kind of good. Now, where I think we're going to start to hear a bit of a difference is if I bring in Oscillator 2 here on the Prophet 600. We're going to get all of this life. I'm going to add a little release to the amplifiers just so it's a little less jarring. Give it even a little more. Yeah, it's kind of nice. Right, so we can get these really beautiful... And there's this incredible life and detune because we have true voltage-controlled oscillators in the synthesizer, making it probably the cheapest 2 voltage-control oscillator per voice synthesizer, vintage synthesizer you can get, which is super great. Let's compare that now to what it sounds like when we increase the level of VCO2, and we compare, so we've got 2 sawtooths here, you guys can see. So immediately you can hear that surprisingly, it has that sort of sound of you know, old bad VSTs where there was no analog modeling to the phase of the oscillator, so it just kind of like has the same phase shape, but it's kind of like almost creates a pluck in there. To me, that is shockingly poor. If I'm being completely honest, I want to hear what you guys think. It's more about your opinion than it is mine, but that is shocking to me that they did not bother to adjust the phase. It's kind of like listening to samples. You hear like what I'm saying? Like instead of there being the natural musical open analog sound of 2 waves clashing against each other and the phase moving in and out, we're just hearing it reminds me a lot of the plugin Absinthe, right? Like, so Absinthe used to be like that. Absinthe is a cool plugin, but a very digital sounding plugin, and it would default. You could turn on that behavior, that analog behavior, but it would default to where you get this sort of boom, boom, boom sort of sound to the detune. Almost like a filter envelope type of sound, right? Do you guys hear what I'm talking about? Now again, just going back over here. So if I go like, you know, right? So if I go, that's vintage. Let's go do that on. I mean, it's fucking night and day. It's not even that close. I'm going to add some attack here. A lot of people have criticized the UI. So the fact that we don't have like knobs for the ADSR, it's just kind of controlled here. I don't really mind that personally. So let's just see if I got it close. That's the Prophet 600. Sounds really great. A little too much release, I think. Let's bring that down a little. A little bit more. Yeah, somewhere in here. You can hear that the detune, there's no phase variance, right? We're getting a very digital sort of detune. Now, if someone in the chat knows how to fix this issue, and if it's something I'm overlooking, please let me know. I didn't see anything in the manual that suggested there was a way to sort of do that, but maybe it's something stupid. So we got the, you know, we have a pitch envelope built in. I don't know if there's a way to modulate time here. Yeah, it sounds like it was sampled Pliskin. It's kind of crazy. We're going through the comparisons now, Bobby, so you're welcome to up with a conclusion here. I don't really have one yet. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. So the digital audio converter on this PC is about as good as you could possibly buy. Windsor, for sure. The like I said, RME basically sets the standard for that sort of thing. Vincent says, I don't think there's a way to turn off the oscillator phase retriggering. Indeed. Terrible. Yeah, I mean, it's just shocking that, you know, in 2024, anyone would put a plugin out that has this issue, much less a really big company, you know, arguably sells more synths than anybody. I don't know if that's true, but they sure seem to on Sweetwater. So, Pliskin says, well, I'm not a fan of this GUI. I think VSD should break away from knobs and embrace mouse touchpad friendly controls. Yeah, I agree with that. That's totally a fair thing. Here's another big fucking issue I have. So this detune knob, right? On a lot of hardware and software, for some reason you have 3 semitones of range, whereas you usually only on like a hardware synth have like a tone of range, a semitone maybe. We've got 3 here, so you guys can hear that. See any purpose for having more detune than this. That's a semitone. It's just shy of a semitone, and this is pretty, you know, if you want that Axis virus sound, that's about what you're looking for, a semitone of detune, right? So what really is upsetting though is, so we can listen to it with no detune. Actually kind of nice, right? But then the smallest value I can get is 0.6 or 6 cents, which is fine. But then the next value is 12, and then 18, right? So there's no, you can see it's not, oh my fucking God, it's hard to get it. And then you're already at 24 or like halfway there. That's about the max amount of, yeah. And so if you double click, Parbs asks, can you not click the knob and input a text field? No, you cannot. And as far as I can tell, when you're on the oscillator, like, so this blue screen shows up giving you like all the things you can control, but oscillator detune is not one of those things. And there's no way. So a lot of plugins you can hold shift and move. That doesn't seem to help. Control, I think maybe control gives you, yeah, okay. So control seems to give you the fine tune, but it's like really weird. Yeah, so you can get fine tune with control, but it's like, you guys can't see, but I'm moving my mouse quite a bit just to get like one little difference here. So I've moved my mouse. I moved my mouse almost a full 2 inches and then it just jumped. So I don't know. what is going on with this. That seems like, again, just real simple, like a real clear bar that you could jump over. So yeah, not great. Again, if I hold control here, I have now moved my mouse a full 6 inches and it hasn't moved, and it seems like I have to move my mouse faster, and then it jumped from 0.01 to 121. You guys can see that, right? Like, I'm not crazy here. Mouse wheel does not give you fine-tune control. Actually gets you less fine-tune control than just using the wheel normally. Yeah, so really frustrating, because detune is such an important part of how you make synth sounds, right? So for me, that's a swing and a pretty big miss as far as that goes. Let's compare the sound of the pulse width modulation. So we will put both of these into square wave, and we will adjust the pulse width to about 50% on both. And so what that's going to do is it's going to send LFO1, the rate here, to the pulse width. And then on the Prophet 600, we'll just do the same thing, right? We will put the square waves on, right? Pulse width at 50 for both of them. And then we will send some LFO mod to the pulse width and see what we get. So we can, on the Prophet 600, take the pulse width modulation all the way through 0 if we wanted to, which I don't think sounds good. I don't know why anybody would do that unless you're doing some more experimental stuff. I bet this plugin is crawling with spyware. That's hilarious. Let's turn the frequency down a bit. So we can get some really lush, gorgeous analog tones out of this synthesizer. Let's jump over to the Vintage plugin and see how it sounds. It sounds like we need to increase the rate a little bit here. Maybe we need to increase the LFO amount a bit, so we'll make this like 75 on both of them. What do you guys think? A little faster? Too fast. The reason I'm not using the knobs to MIDI map is because the Prophet 600 was actually one of, if not the first synthesizer to have MIDI. So when Dave Smith invented MIDI, actually hooked a Prophet 600 up to a Roland Jupiter 6 at NAMM or NAMM, I always get that wrong, to show how MIDI worked. And it was like a collaboration between Roland and Sequential as well as other companies. So the knobs do not spit out MIDI, unlike a modern hardware synth. So that's just why I'm doing that. Mr. Cowfood, no, Behringer's giving this away for free. So in terms of value, you can't beat it, except for there are other free vintage analog plugins on the market, like Disco DSP's OBXD. I'm going to give my opinion. I'm going to reserve my opinion till the end of the stream to talk about that, the comparison between these two. We might even do a stream in the future comparing the two of them. It might be fun. But for now, I just want to talk about whether or not Behringer Vintage actually sounds like a vintage synthesizer to you. So yeah, so that's not really giving me what I want. And what's interesting is I think if I adjust the width here to, like, say 25 on both of them, right, it's just going to get even narrower. Right, it's not making the problem any better. So there's sort of this interesting thing where with the pulse width mod on the software, it just isn't really that thick. Yeah, I mean, just comparing that to the Prophet 600 now. Yeah, so we probably slow that rate down a bit. But yeah, I mean, just the comparison there is, oh, Legally does give you CC. For whatever reason, I wasn't seeing it showing up on my MIDI logger, but there could be an issue that I didn't set it up in here. most people will not be controlling Behringer Vintage with a hardware synth anyways, so it's kind of fun to do the comparison. And also, the knobs aren't going to map perfectly because it's not the exact same thing. So, yeah, when it comes to this, I mean, listen to how beautiful the Prophet 600 sounds, jumping over to Vintage. You know, I mean, it's I mean, it's not terrible, right? But comparing I mean, it's just night and day to my ears anyways. Yeah, I don't know why that is. It seems, and again, I'm just paying attention to the PWM for a second here. It just doesn't seem to give me what I want. It could be that the analog circuitry, there's a little bit more randomness going on with the LFO, but I don't think so. I mean, maybe slightly varying amounts of PWM to the different oscillators, but yeah, it sounds pretty good. I mean, I could maybe try to tune this a little tighter. Again, I would just like to point out how nice this fine-tune control is. You almost can, you're only at the top end of the range does it start to get a little pitchy. There's a huge workable range. Right? And so it's just an interesting sort of comparison here as far as the sound goes. Can we do on the triangle wave? So jumping over to Vintage. No, we can't. So that's not too surprising. Let's jump back over to sawtooth waves now, right? And we just need to increase some amount of detune. So we can actually listen to the filter. Well, I mean, essentially, Sari, we are comparing it pretty close to something like Behringer Pro 800 because the Pro 800 is a clone of the Prophet 600. So, you know, this is definitely the type of synth Behringer has cloned, knows probably more than anybody how to clone these guys other than maybe Sequential. So let's check out the filter on Behringer Vintage and we'll do the same thing with the actual hardware. And again, you guys just tell me what you guys think. So please call out in the chat as we're going what you think of the filter. One thing is double clicking here, sorry, it doesn't actually give you 0. It gives you a little boost and it's just, okay, so we're just going to have to deal with a little negative envelope there. Yeah, pretty good. I don't know what we were expecting. Same thing over here. Not too surprising, right? It's pretty much. Now, one thing is the Prophet 600, actually, the filter gets very bright, and Gleegly Mod added a mode which doesn't let it get quite as bright. And that does make it sound more vintage. So the fact that the vintage software, we're going to listen to that now, doesn't go quite as bright, I don't think is necessarily bad. Yeah, it just doesn't go that much. By increasing the envelope, we can get there, though. Get that brightness if we want it. So you have to use a little bit of envelope to open up all the way. That is how an Oberheim would work, for instance. Yeah, so not super impressive. Let's crank up a bit of resonance, right? Like maybe about 25%. So Behringer Vintage again. I'm going to adjust this ADSR just to give us, you know, a really... you know, a usable sort of sound to compare here. And now jumping over to the Prophet 600. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let's go to 50% on both of them. The resonance gets pretty harsh on the Prophet 600 quickly. It was sort of a characteristic of later, the Curtis chips as opposed to the SSM chips that were used in the original Prophets. Prophets 1 and 2. Prophet 5 Rev 3 did have Curtis chips in the filter, so that's the thing. So Vintage again. So now we're listening to Vintage at 50% resonance. I don't think they sound, I don't think you're nuts, Bobby. I really don't. You can hear that at 50% resonance, the Prophet 600 is already screaming. And we're nowhere near that with Behringer Vintage. Parb says, now I know why they called the plugin Vintage, because it sounds like a freeware VST from 1998. Tragically, I'm starting to agree with you a bit. I will say the resonance on the filter does sound good. Let's just, let's go back to Vintage here. Let's see if we can get it to scream. See, that actually sounds good, and like a little bit of like a little slop in there. To me, it sounds, it's got that Oberheimy growl. Let's put it to 100%. Dial that back. Yeah, so it sounds pretty good for what it is. What do you guys think? Just kind of comparing those two sounds, right? So at about like 4, let's see. Pretty fucking ballsy. And then back to Behringer Vintage. What do we think? Does this sound like a vintage synthesizer? For one thing, it sounds more like a ladder filter in terms of having a bit of bass roll off that we're not getting with the Prophet. You can hear a sort of interesting filter slop thing going on. So it's fascinating to me that they modeled some filter slop. What I mean by that is that there's per voice, the cutoff is slightly off. So that's like something that, you know, an old vintage synth might have, so that it's not perfectly calibrated, and that's part of what makes a vintage synth sound beautiful. So they've modeled that more aggressively than you would hear in an actual vintage synthesizer, right? Because you don't hear that amount of filter slop from the Prophet 600. However, they didn't do like just typical garden variety freeware, I hate to say it, you know, free running phase of the oscillator. So you have like very poor detune. Yeah, that's very fascinating. Plant Powered Muscle, welcome to the stream. How's it going? This or Juno X? Well, you guys will have to be the judge of that. If you think this is a better or worse recreation than Roland's Zen Core sort of a thing. Yeah. So hey Chris, welcome to the stream. So far what I would sum up is the oscillator detune and pulse width modulation isn't really there. it's the sawtooth sounds pretty close. The filter, well, just listen to the filter. Why don't we just do another filter sweep again? So listening to Behringer Vintage here. Swapping over to the Prophet 600. Add a little more resonance in. Yeah. Now, to be fair, Behringer have given us some choices here that we don't have on the Prophet 600. So Prophet 600, this is a 24 decibel per octave filter, meaning every octave it loses 24 decibels of volume above the cutoff, right? So we actually have different slopes. We could put Behringer Vintage into a 12 decibel per octave. So like the Yamaha CS70M has that. Other synths with a 12 decibel per octave would be like the original ARP filters on the Odyssey. What are some other ones, guys, off the top of your heads that have? I think the Oberheim OBXA had a switchable filter, or maybe it was the OB8. I can't remember. Certain other synths, possibly Jupiter 6 had it as well. So listening to that. Windsor, I promise you that you're hearing Behringer pretty much as pristinely as you possibly could. And with the Prophet 600, it's really just I have a cable running out of the back of this into the computer, and that's that. There's I don't think any possibility of that not affecting the sound. So we have that option. We also have different drive modes. So symmetry 1, 2, and 3, as well as asymmetrical 1, 2, and 3. These are interesting because you don't really have like a drive knob or something to control it, other than I guess just the amount of level you pump into it. But for the sake of it, why don't we just check this out and see if it gets us a little bit closer to the analog sound of an analog synth, because there certainly is some saturation occurring in the analog synthesizer. Let's turn the volume up even more. So that's how that sounds versus it off. I think I like it off. It's, I don't know, symmetrical too. Yes, the 8 voice, right, were also 12 decibel per octave. It's interesting how symmetrical 3 actually seems to like dull the resonance. Try asymmetrical 3. Yeah, it's interesting how you don't really, the drive actually seems to cancel out. I mean, I've got the resonance maxed out, and this is not very resonancy. Yeah, very weird characteristic to the filter. And also just not very vintage, right? So most vintage synthesizers, especially the classic ones, had pretty screaming resonance that I'm not even a huge fan of, right? Like, so when you push this, I'll dial the, volume back here, but if you push the Prophet 600, oh, I gotta swap over to this actual synth. right? I mean, that's just such a crazy amount of resonance. Steve Webb, welcome to the stream. I've actually done a video on Tyrell N6, and I think Disco DSP's OBXD is also another great free option if you want a free analog synth plugin. Yeah, so that amount of resonance is pretty intense, right? It's just, I don't really know sound design wise why you would need that much, except for like some crazy sci-fi shit. So I'm not like the biggest fan, and I actually like some of the later, like lesser vintage synthesizers, like the Alpha Juno 2 or the Roland JX8P, that the filters don't fully self-oscillate. And that kind of sounds closer to vintage, but those aren't, generally speaking, what people want out of vintage software recreation. They want those classic synthesizers like the Jupiter 8 and the Prophet 5 and the Oberheim OBXA, stuff like that, that has that ripping character to it. So with that in mind, I would say that the filter, you know, I'm going to leave the opinion making up to you guys, but I think you can tell that I don't really know what the filter is. It sort of reminds me most of a Moog filter, if I'm being honest. It kind of has that Moogy sort of laddery character, a little bit of Oberheimy character in there too. The resonance doesn't sound bad with the drive off. I think it can sound kind of cool. Yeah, like that sounds pretty good. I mean, it does sound a little freeware from 98, but it does have a nice sort of chirpy Oberheimy thing to it. So I really can't, you know, blame them for that all too much. What are some other things to look at while we're in here? We got key tracking. We could modify the resonance with the LFO. So that's something you can't do in most vintage synthesizers. You could also loop the ADSR, which is cool. Not many vintage synthesizers had that capacity either. What are some other things? We do have noise that could be turned on and fed in. So just real quick, let's turn the resonance off. And so turn this off and just listen to the noise. And the color knob allows us to adjust the sound of that. You can hear that even with the level all the way down, it's just -40. It doesn't go to infinite. Mighty Pinto, welcome to the stream. How's it going? So that's also very weird that you can't get just noise, right? You can hear with that all the way down. You can hear that that's still in there. Yes, Mighty, Wharf Son of Moog, that is the proper way to say Moog. A lot of people say Moog. I said Moog for a lot of years, but it's German, so Moog would be the proper pronunciation, I believe. So also another weird little thing in here, but turning the noise up pretty loud, you can do that. So that's something, I don't believe there's noise on this synth. So that's something they pulled out of the Prophet 5 with the Prophet 600 just to keep costs down. They had to cut a couple of corners, and that's one of the ways they did it. So we've compared the oscillators and the VCF, the filter, right? Let's, so one thing that seems to be kind of missing from this that you could do on something like a Hans Volt, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Tony Thomas, welcome. Pliskin, yes, this is Behringer's first VST, and it is free with an optional donation to a charity that they'll match, which is cool. Let's just cover a couple more things in vintage here. So you'll notice we have low pass, band pass, high pass, and formant. They advertised it as having a notch filter. So I think if like you look at the marketing online, you'll see something that looks like, where's the... that they had a like a notch filter option, but I actually don't see it here. So I see high pass, band pass. Very beautiful sounding. I love these types of sounds. Very few synthesizers had high pass and band pass filters as options. You know, maybe you'd have a high pass filter in something like a Juno, and that was to be used in tandem with the low pass filter if you wanted to more or less use it as an EQ to sort of shape the tone. In this case, we could still do that because you can see we actually have two filters in Behringer Vintage. So we could have one set up as sort of your traditional low pass filter, and then you could use the other as a high pass filter, leave the envelope at 0, and just use it kind of like you would with a Juno. But very few synthesizers had a dedicated high pass filter as like the primary thing. Terry's going to visit the Moog factory this week. That's awesome. Super cool. Yes. Christian, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Yes. So then we also have a formant filter. And what's interesting here is, again, like I don't see a notch filter, which would have been nice. So this is, you know, interesting. So, you know, if that's something that you're interested in, this type of sound. To me, it's a little bit more like Bon Jovi talk box guitar type of a thing. And of course, the dubstep guys really abused this in the 2000s to do that sort of thing, you know, the Skrillexy type stuff. But so that option is there, and not vintage at all, but, you know, it's a, you know, software plugin. You can't really bang it for that too much. So we don't have any filter FM. So jumping over to the Prophet 600 over here, if we add some, you know, if we add some ADSR to this, we can get more of a brass type tone. Right, so it's sort of your typical brass type thing. But what we have is this polymod section. So you'd have this on a Prophet 5.2, and we can route oscillator B's pitch to the filter. And so if we do that, you'll notice at first it sort of sounds more like you're just opening the filter. You can hear it's sort of adding a nice brightness. As we increase resonance, though, so it can get pretty extreme if we dial the resonance back. It's much more usable. Nice little chewy sound. Have a great night, Autumn. I love you very much. Thank you for hanging out all evening. John Johnson, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Might be fun layered with a soft saw lead kind of thing. Yeah, that would be cool. So that's kind of an example. We could turn oscillator B off here. So now we're just listening to oscillator A. And then as we adjust the tuning here, right, we could get some really weird tones. So it's actually kind of... kind of how you can get sort of formanty stuff. So you actually kind of can get a formanty sort of tone. And that's filter FM. That's not a formant filter, right? Jumping back over to vintage. Formant. Jumping over to the Prophet 600. Right. So, I mean, maybe maybe I spoke too soon, and you know, it is good to have a four-man filter there, but there's no indication of anything like filter FM, which again, you got on some synths, you know, Prophet 5 could do it. I'm trying to think of other early synths that could do it. I don't know. I know like a lot of synths had cross mod, even like the JX3P, Junos and stuff had cross mod. I don't think we have any way to do that here. So if we select an oscillator, tell me if I'm missing it, guys, but I don't see that. We do have hard sync, so that's something we can do on both synthesizers. So turning that off real quick and going. You can hear how much that was doing to the sound. Altair 231 has filter mod. Right? So, now if we put it into hard sync mode, what's interesting is the hard sync is sort of backwards. So if I turn off oscillator A, or how's it work? Maybe it's the other way? You get these really interesting sorts of tones out of it. And then, of course, we use the filter envelope as and modulate oscillator A with that. We get more of that typical sort of thing. Right? Jumping over to Behringer Vintage. What do we have? We have sync here. And then we can turn that on and see. Put the low pass filter mode, open all the way up. And then I think if we just use a pitch envelope on VCO2. Am I missing something here? Doesn't it seem like there should be more stages to the pitch envelope? Right? Like, so the pitch envelope is just a simple decay, and you can control the level positive or negative. Unless, again, I'm missing something, but I don't think I am. Please, someone tell me I'm missing something here, but doesn't it awfully seem like there's no way to control? I mean, you can have a falling pitch, right? But what people want from a hard sync sound is that type of sound, right? And if I put it into unison mode, sort of that classic sound, right? I don't know if I maybe put it into chord memory mode or whatever. But you see what I'm saying? Like, you need a rise and a fall to be able to get that sound. So again, just makes me feel like Behringer did not give a fuck when they put some of this together. It's very surprising that this doesn't have some of these features, and I'd like to see them show up at some point. So if I put this into slave mode, what happens here? I don't know what's going on here. Maybe slave mode makes one knob control the other one? I don't know. So jumping over to this synth. So if we put it into format mode, let's see. I don't know what slave is doing here. Right? What is happening? What am I doing wrong? All right. I have no idea what's going on with that. So we're just going to go back to like a very simple sort of patch here. Just to try to... Yeah, Korg Odyssey with the sequencer modulating the coarse frequency of Oscillator 2. Yeah, that's like the classic sound, right, of hardware sync, hard sync in hardware, and I'm just not getting it. So we have two VCOs. You know, we've got different shapes here. We have different shapes here on the on this, so we could do noise ramp versus noise. Yeah, so we could do the sample and hold thing on both of these, right? So if we just add some resonance here, we go to the Prophet. We're gonna get like a nice low sound, and then as we add, route that to the filter. So that's how we could use, like, in this case, we're using sample and hold, LFO modulating the filter. Let's see if we can do that same thing over here on Vintage. So the first thing we need to do is just bring the filter down and crank the resonance up. Turn the envelope down as far as we can. Again, it's difficult. At least here we can type in a value of 0, I suppose. That's kind of nice. And then let's go to LFO2, noise, width, and then, or I guess I have to set it here. Okay. Oh, cutoff mod. So this is so strange to me that you can control the resonance with the LFO. Not a crazy thing to do in a bit of software like Serum or Omnisphere, but nothing I've ever seen on a single vintage synthesizer. I don't know if you guys can think of a vintage synthesizer that has resonance mod. Okay, so why is LFO2, where is that coming in? Because I'm getting this one, right? Maybe that only affects VCF2? Is that how that works? So maybe I just have to do it here. Oh, this is crazy. Listen to how you actually can't even get a decent sample and hold out of this. Because it's slewed. So what that means is that it's like smoothed out. So you see how you've got like these jagged edges here? So that's kind of what it should sound like, is where it's being sampled at random points and you get a sort of like a stair step. But this is going like very sinusoidal, which is strange because you actually have a truly sinusoidal noise. Yeah, So that's like a random LFO, and then this is just kind of halfway in between. It's not. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything here. Does offset do anything? No, it doesn't fix anything. Wow, shocking. Really, really shocking in terms of what can't be done. So we have a couple of LFOs. Those, I guess, can be routed to, so let's set one. Okay, so I guess this affects LFOs or VCO2's pitch. Nope. That's still affected by LFO1. So I'm not sure where the routing is for LFO2, what it affects. Maybe it just affects something else that I'm not aware of. Parbs, is it, honestly, am I enjoying shitting on a Behringer product? A little, perhaps, but I would much rather Behringer have put out an awesome product and me be able to recommend this, because my big thing on this channel is getting beginners into making synthesizer music, and especially things like free software I think is incredible, and I'd love to see more free software that helps musicians get going and they could get professional results. The problem with this is that I don't think it's particularly good, which is a little more onerous than normal because it's coming from Behringer. Then they have a bit of a reputation, don't they? I mean, not even my opinion, but just I'm offering a statement on the nature of the reality of this brand at some point here. So yeah, really interesting. It looks like maybe what we could do is get a let's see here. Let's turn the LFO mod off here, and then let's see what the sub mode does. What does that do? I don't know what that does, so if someone knows what sub does, let me know. So what have we covered? I mean, we have a second VCA here. I don't know what this is doing. We have a unison mode, so that's if you want to add more detune and turn it more into. I just can't help but be like, Behringer Vintage sounds like an access virus, right? It does sound like a VST from the 90s a little bit, and just more of this. And again, this detune knob is so fucking out of control. I guess it's kind of nice you could do these fifths here. That's cool, but you already have you could already program that in right over here. So this would be much more useful if it was a much more controlled range, right? That is just so strange. Well, that's what I was thinking, that it was a sub oscillator, but I'm not really I'm not seeing how that sub oscillator does anything. Hypothesis says this VST is giving alpha or beta vibes. Hopefully they will improve it. I hope they do too, because a lot of people, I think, might download this and use it as their plugin because they're thinking to themselves, hey man, this is a great recreation of vintage hardware that no one can afford, right? That's a lot of what the Behringer marketing is that people just can't afford vintage synths. And that's one of my goals on this channel, is to confront that myth and talk about synthesizers that are affordable. You can buy a Prophet 600 for less than a sequential Take 5. Now, of course, the Take 5 has effects and sequencer, all sorts of stuff. I guess this has a sequencer and arpeggiator as well. But for me, the thing is, well, arpeggiator for sure. I think the sequencer might be a glee thing. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But the point is, there's no doubt that modern synthesizers can get a lot done that you can't get with a vintage synth. But there's something about the sound and the magic of having a piece of history in your hands when you're making music, and it just really does sound great. So let's see here. Let's see, Propo Tide. Many of the Behringer clones are excellent for beginner, though, not least because of sensible pricing, and many of them sound great. I agree. I just also think that their marketing kind of paints it as they're the only company that's putting out affordable synths, and that's just not the case. When it comes to like this year, when I was reviewing the synth market, what's the name of that brand? Modal's Cobalt 5S, right? That was the cheapest at the time 5-voice polysynth that was not paraphonic or anything. So that was cheaper than what Behringer was putting out with the, as far as when you compare features, right? Sven, I think that as far as free synths go, there could be better choices. Synth One wipes the floor of this. Is it still in high pass mode? Nope. It's in low pass mode. There's no motivation for them, Machine Storm says, and yes, I agree. There's really not a whole lot of reason for them to put a lot of time into fixing a free plugin. Poly 800 with the Moog Slayer mod, pretty cool. Absolutely one of the coolest vintage synths you can get. A Poly 800 Moog Slayer you can often get for 400, as cheap as a Pro 800. Windsor says, well, okay, I get it. However, if you're going for people that can't afford a synth, there's not going to be able to get a good PC either. Yeah. So the thing is, Windsor, though, that not everybody's stuff is going to suck because most computers nowadays can handle all of these VSTs fine, and they're going to sound as good as they can, right? There's no real issue there. You keep going back to that, and I just don't think that's a thing in 2024. In 1994, for sure, there was like such a thing as having a computer that wasn't powerful enough, and the VST's not going to sound right. But that's just not how digital audio works. Like digital audio, if you're at 44.1, any error is happening above audible frequencies, right? So, within a modern DAW, 64-bit floating point, all of that sort of thing, if a computer can run the VST, which a lot of these, the whole download package for this was like 6.5 megabytes or something, it's going to be fine. It's not something you have to worry about. Let's see here. Chris Farrell, that's awesome. Yeah. Let's see what else is going on in the chat. Let me just catch up here. Yeah, Pro 1 and TD3 sound like the real thing. Sven says, tell that to my studio computer. Parb says, a 10-year-old PC for a few $100s can still pretty much run anything. I agree with that. 1994, a 2 megabyte RAM, 420 megabyte hard drive was $2,500. Yeah, that sounds about right. Because you still have the digital to audio converter out. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying you don't have to worry about. We could do it, but as a professional mastering engineer, you don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to ask you to take my word on that one. So that's okay. We can agree to disagree. So I want to cover a couple of things here real quick before we get to the vote, right? Talking a bit about some of the controversies around this plugin, and also that, which I'm not here to spread drama, but this does seem uniquely poised for us to talk about a couple of things because in this case, it's a free plugin, but I do think there's going to be a lot of people who invest time into this plugin, which is more valuable than money in my opinion. And there are other companies with free software. In my opinion, Disco DSP's OBXD smokes this thing out of the water. Also a free plugin, analog emulation of the OBX synthesizer, and really does sound pretty damn analog. So I would go support them perhaps. So one of the things was when this plugin came out, it was kind of humorous. It seemed to come out like a week or two before they were ready, and so their website crashed and like no one could download it. That isn't really a controversy. It's just kind of a funny thing. Then Tone 2 had to come out and give a disclaimer that they did not collaborate with Behringer at all. And I'm not saying that Behringer ripped off Tone 2 for the design of the synthesizer, right? But if you look at it and then you go back to Behringer vintage and then you go back to it, you can see why some people thought that. And so again, I'm not trying to spread anything, but what I am trying to say is it was enough of a thing that Tone 2 themselves actually had to come out and say, hey, we didn't work with Behringer. This is not a extension of Tone 2 Saurus or anything like that. So I thought that was an interesting, a little tidbit as well here. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the donations and the charity. So what you can't really take away from Behringer is what they're doing is there's a charity called Play for Change. I believe I'm saying it right, or Playing for Change. And what that charity does is it tries to get musical instrument children across the world who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford instruments. And I think that's awesome. And what's really awesome is that if anybody donates for Behringer Vintage, so they say it's like they would have sold it for $99, which is a joke. This is not worth $99. Honestly, there's many other free plugins from companies like Tal and UHE and Disco DSB that all sound better than this by a long shot and have more interesting features, yada, yada, yada. You guys have listened to the stream this far, so you already know that for yourself. But what is cool is that Playing for Change is helping kids get musical instruments. And if you donate anything, they will match that donation. So say you donate $100 or the $99 for the plugin, they will donate $99 as well, which I think is cool. I just want to bring up a couple of things because social responsibility I think is important, and I know people will watch this video. So when you look up on Charity Watch, Playing for Change Foundation actually doesn't score bad, but it doesn't score good. So it's a 2-star charity because of its ranking, right? Because it's not as transparent. And what Charity Watch or Charity found different websites you can look up to look at how charities are impactful. They basically look at all of the transparency of the charity and try to decide how much of your money is actually going to the cause as opposed to getting eaten up in administration fees and the CEO of the nonprofit's salary and stuff like that. And so Playing for Change does okay. By contrast, the Bob Moog Foundation, which basically does a similar thing, trying to help kids get musical instruments, is a 3-star charity. So if you want to donate to a charity, I might consider recommending that one, although it is nice that Behringer is matching your donation. And what I also discovered, and none of this stuff is hard to find too, by the way. I'm not going down a rabbit hole here. You can look this all up. And in fact, I encourage you to do this type of thing. Anytime a company, not just Behringer, says they're going to donate to charity, to actually look up that charity and see to what degree do you actually think that's a wise use of your money as opposed to maybe just donating to a charity that has a higher value. And I actually found that this isn't the first time Behringer has worked with Playing for Change. They actually did when they released the Oberheim UBXA or the Oberheim OBXA clone UBXA, which came out this year. They did the same sort of thing, which was if you paid more, they said the synth was worth $1,500, but they dropped the price to $1,200, hoping that people would donate the difference of $300 and that Behringer would match that donation as well. So this actually isn't the first time they're doing something for charity, which I haven't noticed anybody else on YouTube talking about. And the interesting thing here is that I pulled this screenshot here. This is just a screenshot of the article from Playing for Change, and it's discussing how Uli basically, you can read here, he desperately wanted to own one of these synths, but they were way too expensive for him. He spent every minute at the local music store to play these beautiful instruments, but one day the store owner kicked him out and told him he was taking up space for other customers who could actually buy the synths. Feeling hurt and frustrated, Uli decided to build his own synthesizer, the UB1, at the age of 16. Yada, yada, yada. He realized that many musicians like him could not afford the gear they wanted and decided to dedicate his life to making audio equipment for the people who needed it the most and giving them a voice. Almost 50 years later, Behringer's mission is to bring back all the legendary synths from the 80s and make them affordable and accessible to everyone. And it keeps going, actually, with what I don't think is the most tasteful way to go where it kind of compares Uli to these kids in third world countries, as that those kids are kind of like, he's basically the same as those kids, right? Like as a kid in Africa growing up without synthesizers, he too could not afford synthesizers when he was growing up. And again, I don't do this to pick on Uli or Behringer, but I found this a little distasteful, if I'm being honest, to sort of imply that Uli is the only person who's making synthesizers cheap for people. There are many companies that are doing that, although I will give Behringer total credit that they probably have put a lot of good pressure on big synth companies to lower their prices just because they know Behringer is going to clone their stuff. And, you know, the thing is that Chris says they're doing a nice thing, but it sounds like they're just using it for a tax write-off the bat. And the thing is other YouTubers have brought this up. Weaver Beats had a video that came out recently talking about this, where basically he looked at it, and I'm going to paraphrase his words, so I'm sorry if I get it a little wrong, but essentially saying he just sees it as like a PR stunt, where because they have such a bad name, they're doing this like charity thing to try to make it seem like they're a better company than they are. I don't know. I encourage you to check out his video and draw your own conclusions from that. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of add a little extra context to what's going on here, because to me, this sort of idea that Behringer is like saving the world from outrageous synth prices, I just don't think that's true. Vintage synthesizers are a very common comment I get on my vintage synth videos, because that's what I primarily do here on this channel. Which, by the way, if you made it to this point in the video, please hit that like and subscribe button. It seems like you're the type of person who would like my content, so I would appreciate it. It helps out a lot more than you realize. But, you know, all the time I'm covering vintage synthesizers that you can buy often for prices cheaper than a Behringer Pro 800, right? So this idea that, you know, vintage synthesizers are just way too expensive. Of course, there are some, right? If you want to get the synthesizer they use to do R2-D2's voice, it's going to be a fucking insane amount of money. But there's so many other cool vintage synths from back in this era that do so much and are so great. And then modern synth companies too are putting out a lot of really great products. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to add a little context to this discussion as well. So not just comparing the sound, but also kind of comparing this particular company to the rest of the market. I hope this wasn't too much of a me on my, what do they call that, soapbox, me preaching sort of a thing. My goal here is not to preach and not to shame anybody for getting a Behringer synth. I think it's, if you have a Behringer synth, do not feel shame at all, okay? I just want to kind of hold the company accountable and not the consumers accountable, right? That's always my sort of line in the sand. So with that, why don't we jump on over and go over here? And I want to know from you guys, what do you think? I'm going to create a poll here. Does Behringer Vintage sound vintage? And I'm going to start the poll. I just want to see what you guys have to say. So we shall see. The Boss clones were offensive to me, Zap says. I agree. Yeah. Let's see. Just catching up with the chat here a bit. Parb says, after years of cloning people's products and undercutting them and making cheap stuff that's likely to break and become junk, Dubstation Zero says this plug-in is a PR stunt. They spent more on the spin than the R&D. I can't help but probably agree with you, Dubstation, that things like the fact that the detune is totally fucked in the plug-in, like it's not analog at all, makes me think they didn't put any effort into actually making. This isn't a real product that they decided to give away for free because they want to help people. You know, that doesn't feel like it. It feels like something else, unfortunately. And I think especially Chris is probably onto something that has more to do with tax write-offs than anything. Uli said before that Behringer is a company that doesn't make any profit. So not a non-profit, but a not like profitable company because of the tax write-offs, right? So, or he hasn't said because of the tax write-offs, but that's what that means, right? Is basically, huge tax write-off. So I'm happy that kids are getting synthesizers, right? You know, and that, so I am happy about the charity. I don't know, I think I will still personally donate to the Bob Moog Foundation because they're a 3-star charity as opposed to 2 on the same website that I was using. So it's, of course, the choice is yours. But I think I would encourage you to donate to that charity instead. It, you know, in case you were thinking of doing that. It's great that Behringer will match that, and ultimately that's a good thing. I don't really care if, you know, about the politics and all of that in this little synth drama community, whatever. If kids are getting synthesizers, I think that's a positive thing. Yeah. Let's see here. Pro Tide says it doesn't, and neither do many vintage hardware since it's all between the ears. What do you mean by that? That's an interesting take. That some, or I'm sorry, many vintage hardware synths don't sound vintage. So what do you mean? Yeah. Christian says it sounds vintage in a matter of old ugly VST sound. I can't help but agree. It is free. Sari, you have a point. Parb says because Behringer is a dirty word to a lot of musicians and they want to improve their public image. And my thing is, I'm not trying to smear Behringer by providing the context I just did, but that's the goal. It's just to provide context and to also be aware of, I think a lot of the times people realize that they vote with their money, right? They know that if you want to support something by spending money on that company, you're basically telling that company, we want more of what you're doing, right, in the world. And so there's a social responsibility to how you spend your money. It's not just like, you know, a selfish thing. It's like it actually does affect the world. And I would just like to say that that's true even for things that it isn't physical cash. Like, so your time, your investment to actually go download this plugin is all signals that matter more and more in a social media world where things like attention currency. So that's also part of why I'm saying that. Let's see. But I'm not trying to make Behringer a dirty word. I want to make that clear too. Chris says, does Vintage send data back to Behringer? That would explain it. Well, here's the thing too, right? You have to put your email address in to download Vintage. Now, I use this trick too. If you download my free Vintage chorus and reverb plugin, Inktomi, right? You've given me your email. Now you can immediately unsubscribe, but I send discount codes out whenever I have a new product, like my new product Revenant M1, my vintage digital pads collection that just came out. The link is in the description of this video, by the way. But I send discount codes out, like, just that's all it is. Like, if I have a new product, I'll send a discount code out to everybody. But that's good because it means more people buy it, right? And they also get the discount code. So anyways, by giving Behringer your email, you're also basically letting them market to you for free. So I think that's a big part of this as well, that maybe some people don't think about. They're like, oh, I'm just downloading it, right? They don't think about the fact that now Behringer's grown their email list by thousands of people, most likely. Parb says it's like corporations calculating exactly how much charity they have to give in order to profit from the goodwill, no more or less. Yes, and yeah, Synth 1 sounds really good. Breathalyzer, I totally agree. Potide says it all depends on what perceives as a vintage sound. Okay, so I'm going to call you on this one. Let me know what you think. I'm not trying to pick on you here, by the way, too. But as a vintage synth guy, right? So all the synths in this room behind me are vintage. I do think there's a sound to them, right? That's a little different. Doesn't mean that modern stuff couldn't sound like that. Kev Human says Uli never honored his promise of free synths for poor kids until Ben Jordan confronted him about it. I don't know about that, so I'm not going to comment on it. But it's good to see you, Kev. How are you doing? Let's see. Damon Descent says Behringer is judged more on their company dealings than their actual product, it seems. I agree with that. And I don't mean to contribute to that. My judgment of Behringer is purely on the software. And I would have been the first person to be happy to say that it sounds great, right? That would have been a good thing for the world, for there to be the best analog free VST just came out. That would be a good thing. Rudy says, if you've never had a vintage synth, you wouldn't know what to listen for. Could be. People have said, is it an Ableton analysis ripoff? I don't know, because I'm not an Ableton user, but that's another thing. That's in addition to the Tone 2 GUI ripoff thing. Yeah. Windsor says, I still say there's too many variables here. We don't know how he is converting the PC audio and how he's inputting his 600 in the plugin in the back of the PC that is streaming. Windsor, I love you, man, but I just don't think that that's going to be the thing. And if you can provide some sort of way that I could prove that or something, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah. Propotide says, my Synthex and Matrix 6R sound very vintage to me. So does my V-Synth Supersaws, BARP 2600, etc. So, what are you... So you're saying, like, your vintage synth sound vintage, right? You're saying also your V-Synth, but a V-Synth is practically a vintage synth. It came out around 2000, right? So it's almost 25 years old. And then a Behringer ARP 2600 is a recreation of a vintage synth. So I think I'm missing what you're trying to say there. Yeah. I actually don't know the answer to that, Zap. Yeah, and again, I have Behringer preamps that I use. We were not using Behringer preamps today, Windsor. I'm actually running them into Focusrite Scarlett preamp, but maybe I should have run it into the Behringer preamp, and that would have affected the sound slightly. Propotide says, my Bit 1 doesn't sound very vintage to me. Well, it is a digitally controlled oscillator synth, right? So unlike those other synths that have voltage controlled oscillators, so they're going to have that wild thing to the pitch of the oscillators, the Bit 1 digitally controlled. And I actually agree with you in the sense that, you know, when I first turned on the Alpha Juno, and I'd have been listening to the DW8000, which is digital oscillators. I thought the Juno's oscillators might as well be digital because of how tight the tuning was, and it was a bit of a downer for me. So I understand what you're saying. Ableton analog, yeah. I've heard that criticism too. As not having it myself, what I did, Kev, was I looked up the GUI of Ableton analog, and I was like, nah, there's a couple of things that vintage can do that analog can't. I think involving like the 4-man filter and stuff. So with that in mind, I was like, so it's not a direct port or like a rip. I think just a lot of people were like, what does this do more than analog? Because so many people use Ableton, right? Yeah. And I understand that. I totally get where you're coming from, Propotide. I'm not trying to be, yeah. Propotide says, my Juno 6 is DCO2 and sounds very vintage. It's just a quagmire, a personal opinion. Yeah, I get it. You know, I'm not trying to, again, you and Windsor, I'm not trying to call you guys out, and I'm really happy you're here. Please come back and, you know, check out the stream. You guys are always welcome on this channel. I love criticism, and just because I'm engaging with it, I don't mean to be off-putting in any way, but I'm just also trying to give you my opinion, right? Hopefully that's okay. Let's see. Windsor says, we're talking about how the sound in the room, there's no sound in the room that you guys are hearing. So yeah. Yes, Breathalyzer DW8000 does sound very vintage. It's mostly the filter to me is just super dark. Their hypothesis agrees with Propotide, that the sound is in the ear of the beholder, and I agree with that. I mean, there is, I just think that there's certain kinds of sounds that we do collectively associate with vintage synths, whether it's kind of grainy vintage digital or you know, sort of darker, warmer, fatter vintage analog synths. Of course, there's modern synthesizers that can do that sound, and a lot of them are, you know, the worst tuning The most like out of tune synthesizer I've ever had is the Chord Prologue, a modern synthesizer. So those voltage controlled oscillators really went out of tune in a bad way sometimes. Not all the time. So most of the time I was really... Oh, Sari, that's awesome. Love the Poly 6. That's my that's my most vintage sounding synthesizer in my opinion. Yeah. I'm glad you guys have understand where I'm coming from, Windsor and Propatide. I'm not trying to, you know, be an asshole. Yeah. Yeah. Steve says, Tyrell N6 compared to the hardware vintage synth you use, can't remember the one, but you could hardly tell the difference. Yeah, so that's like a really good point is, if you guys watch that video where I compare Tyrell N6 to the Chord Prologue I just talked about, they're very similar, right? It's shockingly close, and there's nothing about N6 that's even trying to be like quote-unquote analog or vintage. Yeah. Pliskin says there's vintage 80s digital, vintage 90s digital, vintage 80s vintage analog, and I would argue like 70s vintage analog often has a different sound. So like these two synths right here, they have a different kind of sound than a lot of like the Curtis chip synths that came out later on. So yeah, let's go ahead here. I'm going to end the poll. So 88% of you guys said no, in fact, Behringer Vintage does not sound vintage. If you're just tuning in to see the results, I would just say it wouldn't be a bad idea to go back to the stream and check out the oscillator and filter section. Because sadly, Behringer definitely dropped the ball in a couple of places. The most egregious being oscillator detune just does not sound like they put the effort in to make it sound analog at all. In fact, it does sound vintage, but like a vintage freeware VST from the 90s. That's truly what it sounds like in the oscillator section. The raw tone of the Sawtooth was fine though. And then the filter section was better, but the resonance comparison between that and something like the Prophet 600 really just wasn't there either. So Chris Oliveria says, thanks to Behringer, I have a SM58 clone microphone that was insanely cheap. Everything else I've owned from Behringer was cheap in a bad sense. Windsor says, remember, you can't read intent. I'm just saying, yeah, no, totally. And I hope you guys take my intent too with all of this. Sari says, we're all biased. Yeah, and that's true. I'm sure I'm biased as well, right? But I would have been the happiest person to have another free analog synth that I could recommend to people, because that's what I'm about on this channel, is getting people into making music with software synths, vintage synths, modern hardware synths. I don't care what it is. I just want you guys to make music, whether you make it for yourself or you post it online or you want to be a professional musician one day. Anywhere in that range, I'm here to try to make there be more music in the world, and something like a free synthesizer that sounds like a vintage synth is a good thing. It's a good thing, synth people. Even you vintage synth snobs out there, can I get some scum snobs in the chat who don't want the prices of vintage synths to fall? It's still a good thing if people get into the vintage synth sound. The tragedy is Behringer Vintage is simply not cutting it. And even for a free synth, I can't recommend it. Disco DSP OBXD is, in my opinion, still the best synthesizer in the free vintage synth category, free vintage synth analog emulating plugin category. So go there. I'll put a link in the description. I think that's the way to go. A lot of people talk about Tyrell N6, also another plugin I've featured on this channel, completely free by the Synth plugin gods UHE. It's a free plugin from them. It sounds incredible. So yeah, I would be the first person to be excited about this synthesizer being incredible. It just tragically is not, and I just don't think it's very good. Oh, and of course Vital's great. It's just not necessarily like a vintage analog thing. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. Yeah, I really had a lot of fun tonight. GeForce Access free from Loop Cloud. I didn't know that that was the thing that you could get. So how do you get that for free? So you're already signed up for Loop Cloud, or I don't know how that works. So anyways, guys, I really appreciate all of you making every Wednesday night here on YouTube the fucking shit. Can I get a scum cheers in the chat? I didn't drink anything throughout this stream. I was so focused on the synth. So can I get me a motherfucking cheers from all y'all out there for making everything on this stream the best fucking shit there's ever been? That was a sentence. I'm Vulture Culture. Cheers. I'm so excited for next week's live stream. I cannot tell you what it is. The company that... I can't tell you what it is. Let me just leave it at that. I don't even want to put anything out there. But it's awesome. And it's cool. So, just next week's going to be a good week. Nick Destruct, how's it going? Ed from Earth, how's it going? I heard you're going to be hanging out with Dub Station soon. Jean-Francis Racine, thank you for hanging out with us tonight. You guys are awesome. Next week's going to be great. Then we've got a couple more things coming up. I've got the Ensoniq TS12 in the studio, so that's going to be coming soon too. We're going to do a stream making music with Revenant M1, my new vintage digital pads collection. You can scoop that right now for $10. The intro sale, it's going up to $15 after the first 6 months or so. Thank you for the alien emojis, Pliskin. So that's going to be a fun one too. If you guys want to check that out, you can see the trailer for that. Sari says he hasn't been drinking for 15 years. Congratulations, man. That's awesome. I mean, tonight I'm drinking just a sparkling hop water, right? So there's no alcohol in this. There's nothing wrong with not drinking. I support everybody's sobriety or your desire to get fucked up. Both of those things are good, so in my opinion. So anyways, guys, I appreciate you being fucking amazing. Continue to be excellent, and I can't wait to see you guys next week.